Hi, this is Manjula Narayan, books editor, Hindustan Times, and today I have with me the legendary Amit Khanna.
Hi.
Hi, who's written this Words, Sounds, Images: A History of Media and Entertainment in India. Here it is, and it's a substantial tome. And you've covered everything. Let's start with why did you have media and entertainment clubbed together?
Interestingly, for two reasons. Uh, Whenever I spoke at conferences or occasionally went to lecture at universities both in India and abroad, and especially a week I spent at NYU, uh, basically doing a series of guest lectures, I realized that there was a lot of interest across media and entertainment in India, and unfortunately, there was nothing substantial or substantive, which a book which covered the entire spectrum.
Okay.
So there were many options. I could have easily written about cinema, which is where I've spent the largest number of
Yes.
years or decades. But I realized that perhaps people should get an overview of how it is developed, and that was the primary reason. But the secondary reason is that today, in the new age, in the digital age, you see a convergence of all media.
That is true.
Actually, so we are at this intersection of all media which is happening currently.
Yes.
So it's interesting to understand the development and the genesis of various media in India, and how they've run in some cases parallelly, and in other cases at cross purposes for a while, and then now they are again converging, where a lot of it is happening within the same set of people, companies, and the audience is no longer differentiating. The same through the same electronic, for example, digital means, you read news or watch news,
Yes.
or watch a movie,
Yeah.
or stream
And everything is in your palm.
yeah, or a palm, or whichever,
Yeah.
or whichever screen you watch.
Yes, yes.
So everything is coalescing together.
Yes.
So this book gives an overview of everything.
And you have worked in a whole different range of media. I mean, you worked in print, you worked in film, you worked, you were, a pioneering figure in you set up Reliance Entertainment, Plus Channel. So both media and entertainment, you've had a very, you've been sort of important figure, So,
I think I've been fortunate enough, partly by and it's partly by design, but more by accident and happenstance, that I have worked. I perhaps am one of the few, if not the only one, who's actually worked in every single media.
Yes.
So within print, as you said, I worked on stage,
Yes.
which is live entertainment. I worked on radio,
Yes.
television. Cinema, film, and
Yes.
within films I've done everything. So I've been a writer, a lyricist, a producer, a director, entrepreneur.
How did you do all this is what I want to know.
I was a workaholic, and a lot of people were surprised. A lot of my creative work, I like the business side of entertainment was my day job, and rest of the time was my creative sort of passion.
Okay.
So I would do this and the day job, and then also concentrate on and pursue my passion, which was writing, later directing, and then exploring new vistas. So I was always fascinated with technology. So I started writing for technology. I mean, in those early days in Science Today.
Oh, Jayan Narlikar.
No, Mukul
that was-
Sharma.
Oh, Mukul Sharma. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Konkana Sen Sharma's
Yeah.
father.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I also found very interesting about this book is that you make all these connections between, through generations. So you've mentioned whose father was who, and
Yeah,
all
because I've been there through generations,
the-
3 generations, 4 generations.
Yes, yes.
When I entered, there was
Yeah.
another set of people, so I met
That's
them,
true.
and then I worked with a generation which is now old, or some of them have passed away. Then they're the next generation, now the new generation. So it's very fortunate that one has had a ringside view of 4 generations.
And you've made all these connections,
Hmm.
among them. That's very. I found that also very fascinating.
It's just I happen to be there at the right time. That's it.
So what I'll do to give the readers an idea of what the book is about. I'll read the flap.
Yeah.
You know, Ambitious and encyclopedic in scope, Words, Sounds, Images is a pioneering book that presents an exhaustive account of the evolution of media and entertainment in India, from the Indus Valley civilization right up to the 21st century. Presented here are topics such as forms of entertainment during the Harappan and Vedic times, including details from the Natya Shastra, the early drama, music, and dance of Kalidas, the development of ragas, musical instruments, and early folk traditions, the genesis of classical dance forms and development through the ages, including in the Mughal period, the southern kingdoms, the northeast, and under the Marathas and the British. Independence onwards, it takes a decade wise look at the evolution of print media, cinema, music, television, dance, theatre, and radio. Amit Khanna, himself a lifelong media professional with diverse experience as a film producer, director, lyricist, and in various roles in the field of entertainment, brings his unique perspective to bear on the subject and makes this a lively, engaging read. A must read not just for students and practitioners of media and entertainment, but also their lay consumers. So that's this book. Now,
Okay.
it's a lot of work, you know. And how long did it take? And I'm assuming you had a team helping you because there's so many facts.
Yeah, because actually there were again 2 options when I started writing. One was initially when I started writing this, I thought it'll be 2 volumes, one dealing with media and the other with entertainment. And then when I spoke to my publishers, HarperCollins, they said, 2 volumes don't sell. So then I decided, let's combine it. And so it meant a bit of reorganizing my thoughts. And interestingly, we had begun research about 4.5 years, now 5 years ago,
Okay.
in 2015, 14 actually. And I had a team led by a very good researcher who'd worked
Okay.
with me many years earlier,
Okay.
Lakshmi Menon, who's a professional, she's a documentist
Okay.
who's worked with UN, and earlier was one of the founding members of Doc Center in Bombay.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, so she had the experience, and then we had a lot of younger people. Every time there were 2 or 3 interns who would work.
Okay.
And the choice made was, which I made was, I'm not going to write an academic book with a large, bibliography and footnotes and annotated kind of
Yeah.
stuff, because then it becomes reader unfriendly.
Yes.
It would become an academic book.
Yes.
So what we did was then started collecting a lot of existing material through different domains, and also doing some amount of primary research.
Okay.
Fortunately, because I had spent almost 5 decades across media, I had access to some first-hand knowledge. So all that was collected, collated, and interwoven. So at the end of it, when we sort of finally funneled everything together, which I sat and did with my team, this turned out to be about 10,000 odd pages.
My goodness.
Of distilled material. So then, when I began writing, there was a constant battle of what do I include,
Yeah.
and what do I write it chronologically, or so the first 3 chapters, which are the pre-independence, actually take leaps, and they only cover milestones and give an overview.
Yes.
Because that's the only way I could write a book which would be,
Yeah.
within 9. Idea was to finish the book with between 900 and 1,000 pages, because that's the limit
Yeah.
for a one book, single edition book. and that's how it sort of evolved itself, and then that's the paradigm which I followed.
Okay. Okay. But the post-independence thing, because you were there,
Yeah.
it's more, it's there's a lot more of you.
And also
yourself
it is more
personally in it.
because there's a lot more of documented stuff,
Okay.
which is authentic, which is there is some amount of data which is validated, but there again one had to cross check, and the book has been written without an ideological bias,
Okay.
which was a conscious decision.
That is difficult though.
Yeah, because otherwise you had 2 or 3 contrarian views. So one used a sort of a personal judgment in certain cases and said this is what happened. So, and if you see, every chapter it starts with an overview of the whole socio-cultural sort of happening of that decade. So it sets the tone of what are the major things which global influences, and the Indian sort of immediate happenings which
Okay.
influenced media and entertainment.
Okay. And also what I found very nice is that like you've given this overview, but you've also given like real facts about, especially like this thing about that which I mentioned, the Parsi lady who was the first.
Saraswati Devi. Yeah.
Saraswati Devi was the first
Woman composer. Yeah.
I mean, as a woman, I found that interesting, but also I thought composers, there aren't many women in the Hindi film
Right through the
industry.
ages, very few.
Yeah. So so there are lots of details like
Yeah,
that.
for example, if you look at the 50s, the decade of 50s, you'll be surprised. Or when I write about radio, of who are the people who worked in radio in the early stages. It's all the famous literature. So it was Raja Rao and Khushwant Singh and Manto and Krishan Chandra and several people worked for All India Radio. When the National Orchestra or Rashtriya Vadya, when it was set up, the first director was Ravi Shankar.
Oh.
And a lot of these people, the classical artists, their haven was AIR, because suddenly they lost patronage.
Oh, yes.
And then the 3 academies were set up, and the ICCR was set up. So all that milieu I've talked about, how they nurtured the arts, performing arts. In the late 50s and early 60s, NSD was set up, the FTI was set up. Besides the 3 academies. So all that helped, in
So all
sort of-
these things that we take for granted now,
Yeah.
you saw them being set up.
Said that, I've also mentioned that there is a lot of hue and cry today about censorship.
Yes.
And about how the present regime, for example, has been ham-handed in handing dissent.
Yeah.
But if you go back to the 50s, Nehru wasn't less dictatorial.
Really?
The number of books which were banned during his time, the number of films which were banned, our people are not even aware of it. In 1955, he passed a cabinet resolution, and not a which is only a cabinet resolution, not a policy, which forbid any foreign ownership of news media in India, and that continued till I think way into it was diluted during Vajpayee's time, and then much subsequently further diluted.
So you're saying that we were always like this?
We are, India, one of the sort of, and you see a parallel in America and the US, wherever there is if democracy is alive, one of the few things which the government doesn't want to surrender control is news. And that's the case today. I mean, if various INB ministers since the last 6 decades have focused only on the information part of it.
That's true.
I mean, I find this whole nomenclature and I was part of several committees which recommended that this needs to be remodeled. And in 21st century, why do you call it the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting? The media is such a large word.
Yeah.
It's expanded. So change the name. That itself shows where the focus is. That's a preoccupation with anybody in power.
Yes.
Even in a democracy, forget about a totalitarian state.
Yes.
So I think we are now much more open than what we were, say, 30 years ago, 20 years
Really?
ago. Yeah.
Oh.
There is much more visible dissent than
that's
what
true.
was possible because of social media, because of technology. One may say that the 70% of the media is pro-government, but that was always the case. There was always a minority which was the dissenting voice. But one of the things which has happened, and I don't agree with it, is this tendency of calling out people who do not dissent. You see, the point is somebody who's sensible enough to understand what the implications are and has an ideologically different or different view than what the liberal set wants. Why should you grudge him? If you are a liberal, you must be able to actually accept that here is a person who accepts this government or this regime or whichever regime comes in power. So by saying, oh, why doesn't so-and-so film star
Yes.
express it, that person may not be accepted.
That's his own will.
It's his own will.
Yeah.
Why should you, it's as bad as trolling. So if one set of trolls are bad, I think the people who call out the trolls are equally bad.
People who call out the trolls, maybe not.
Well, in the sense, ignore. The ideal situation is, if I don't want to comment on it, and I have been also trolled by both sides, because I express my opinion, and certain things, if somebody is right, I'll say, no, this is right. And on economic policy, for example, there are people who believe in the free market and the others don't.
Yes.
So these are issues of...
and these are perennial issues.
Perennial issues. So the question is, I believe that it's utopian to accept complete freedom in any democratic hierarchy.
Okay.
We should aspire for it. And yes, protest is a legitimate tool in a democracy,
Yes.
but it is not the only way out. So that's my point.
It's one of the ways.
It's a way which some people have follow, and they have every right to do so, and I have no grudge against them. But I don't grudge people who support a ruling regime.
Okay.
Because in most cases, because if I take a stand, I will on certain issues. On others, I have a differing view. But so that doesn't mean I'm evil.
Yes.
Which is what is happening now.
That's
so
true.
Polarization or bipolarity has been an Indian reality for many years. But as this book amply sort of illustrates, that Indian culture, basically Indian ethos. So from the beginning of history, the very composition or the way India originated as a nation or as a confederation 5,000 years ago, we have always have been a conglomeration of different regions, hence different ethnicities.
Yes.
And languages, cultures, and that is the composite culture. Composite culture is not post-independent India, which is a strong difference in view with many ideologues of today. It is not, it's secularism as we define it is a leftist, Marxist thought of the last 100 years, but which is distinct from pluralism. I mean, I definitely believe that our culture, and it's been whatever we've inherited in 5,000 years, is the essence of different kinds of people who
Okay.
have lived and continue to live in different parts of the country. There are very few nations in the world where you have 25 odd main languages and
That's
1,000 dialects.
That's true.
You have, even today, about 25% or 30% of your people who are tribals, whose ancestry goes back to primeval times,
Yes.
and they retain some of it. So in our folk music, in our folk dances, there is, and literature, parts of our oral tradition
Yes.
are almost going back to antiquity and still exist. So I am so confident that pluralism has nothing to do with the political ideology.
Okay.
It will always survive. It has even when there have been invasions from Alexander downwards,
Yeah.
till the British and the Mughals and everyone, nothing has changed. That structure remains, the construct
The
remains,
base still.
the construct remains the same, and one of the main reasons for it is our culture, which manifests itself through the performing arts.
Okay. Okay. So that's the core of this book, in a sense. Also.
It gets reflected.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so that's really interesting, and I mean, I think we should also, talk about how you came into, like, Dev Anand. We were talking about it earlier. Dev Anand got you into the.
Well, I was in college in
Yeah.
St. Stephen's, and I used to write on cinema. So I met him once, and somehow they liked me or found something in
When you
me.
were 17.
Yeah, and so he said, "Why don't you come and work with me?" So I said, "I'm still in college. Let me finish." And he kept in touch. And when I graduated, he said, "Okay, now you've done. So why don't you come and work with me?" So I did. I sort of was literally paradropped into the
Hindi film
Hindi
world.
world, and right at the top, and amongst the one of the big
Stars,
producers put me there. And I also happened to be, because of my personal interests, be friendly with the new wave which was starting then, alternative cinema. And I was part of, so all these, the people who started with it, from Mrinal Sen to Saeed Mirza, no, before Saeed, Arur Gopalakrishnan,
Okay.
Arvindan, or Shyam Benegal, Govind Nihalani, they were all friends. They are, and they continue to be. And several generations, and many generations, the next generation worked with me. Almost all of them have worked with me at some point. From Sudhir Mishra to Anurag Mishra to Anurag Kashyap, they've all worked with me.
Okay.
So
that must give you a sense of, like.
Absolutely, that's my probably the most satisfying thing, when I see that over 1,000 people across.
Over 1,000.
Yeah. In across media and entertainment, in different segments, cameramen, editors, journalists, anchors, and actors, directors, writers, editors, they've all at some point or the other been associated with it, which is a great sense of personal joy for me.
Okay. And on that note, we'll end. Thank you so much for
My pleasure,
coming on the
Manjula.
show.
Thank you.
And go out and get this book. It's really informative, and it gives you an idea. And since he's been such a central part of the whole scene, it's something we should buy and keep, really, and refer to regularly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.